Hey yo, what up Wisecrack? Chris here to talk about the show that made vampires cool again. And we're not talking about Vampire Diaries.
Tell me something, when's the last time you had something stronger than a squirrel?
Instead, we're talking about Castlevania. Now, this show is everything we could have wanted from an adaptation of the beloved video game. It's a show that effortlessly blends the source material's lore.
What on earth is that ugly thing?
I don't believe they hid it. It's the Morning Star.
With brilliant character work and breathtaking animation.
That's right! Idiot f***ing livestock.
And to top it all off, it's really funny. And this got us thinking, how did Castlevania manage to succeed where so many previous video game adaptations have failed?
Aliens? Oh, we gotta deal with aliens too? Luigi, we're the aliens!
We think the biggest reason comes down to narrative, or perhaps the lack thereof. We'll explain in this Wisecrack edition on how Castlevania tells a story, and as always, spoilers ahead. To understand what makes Castlevania so great, we need to establish the differences between video game stories and more traditional narratives like books, TV, and film. According to philosophers John Robson and Aaron Meskin, video games can be classified as self-involving interactive fictions, or SIFs. By this, they mean that the story of a video game is designed to be interacted with and affected by the players. Whereas a movie obviously won't change no matter how many times you watch it or what your reaction to it is, a video game changes based on your decisions. Whether you max out stats or speedrun a game, how you play is drastically going to alter your experience. And historically, studio executives have underestimated how difficult it is to translate SIFs into more traditional mediums like film. Because if you cut out the gameplay and stick to your cutscenes, how riveting is the underlying story? How much can an audience really identify with the character now that they're not actively inhabiting them? And this presents us with the problem most video game adaptations face: a plot borrowed from a game but without any of the game mechanics to make it interesting. It's why movie adaptations of Prince of Persia and Assassin's Creed fail to grip us. We're stuck with flat characters following weak plot lines, all of which results in films that only seem vaguely related to the original games. But how does Castlevania address these problems? Well, for starters, the show decides to strip back the plot of the source material in service of developing the world and its characters. Take the show's first season. Whereas Castlevania 3 followed Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard's journey through Dracula's castle to kill the big bad himself, season 1 of Castlevania does away with that plotline entirely. In fact, the whole first season of the series has little to do with actually stopping Dracula. After giving us a surprisingly emotional backstory for why Dracula wants to kill all of humanity, hint, they murdered his wife, he disappears for the rest of the season. Instead, the series pivots to show us the impact this war is having on one particular city, Gresham. Dracula went off the deep end, and night hordes now roam Gresham's streets, while the city's less than upright citizens look for innocent scapegoats to blame.
Is there a defense effort?
Don't need it. We got a tribe of speakers in the city. Once we've done what needs to be done, the demons will leave us alone.
While none of this was in the game, this setup evokes both the characters and the tone of the Castlevania world. The corrupt clergy and the angry mobs they foment, for example, paint a picture of a morally nuanced world, in which no one, vampire or human alike, is totally good.
Targovista is gone. The other great cities are lost or losing. Greshit will be the last major city in Wallachia. To all intents and purposes, I will be the judge.
And its characters largely continue this theme. Trevor Belmont, the last son of a famous vampire hunting family, is a cynical drunk who can't quite give up on the people his family swore to protect.
Oh, keep walking.
And Alucard, far from being the anti-Dracula, is kind of like Trevor. Aloof, nihilistic, yet unwilling to abandon the world his human mother loved.
And so here I am, choosing to honor my mother by killing my father.
Even Sypha, our know-it-all idealist, must learn to adapt a morally gray point of view. While she learns that the sleeping hero under Gresham is no knight in shining armor, but Alucard himself, she prioritizes saving Trevor over adhering to the legend.
I will incinerate you before your fangs touch that man's throat.
I thought I was your legendary savior.
So did I, but he saved my life.
Of course, all of this might just seem like good writing. Why lean so heavily on the plot of the original video game when you can recreate an entirely new story to emulate the feeling of the game and its characters? After all, Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog functionally did the same thing, discarding much of their original stories. And of course, these decisions were likely motivated by the fact that, stripped of gameplay, these stories can't hold their own weight. But as strange as it might sound, we think Castlevania's disregard of the game's original plot might be motivated by something more philosophical, by which we mean its guiding commitment to something called anti-narrative. To understand it, we first need to talk about traditional narrative structure. According to scholars like Seymour Chapman, every narrative has two levels, the story and the discourse. The story, Chapman explains, is the plot of the narrative, the events that happen. In Lord of the Rings, for example, Frodo takes the ring to Mordor. Boom! Simple. Discourse, on the other hand, refers to how the story is told, which, if you're J.R.R. Tolkien, includes literary techniques such as writing super long, boring songs.
Give the glasses, crack the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates.
Now, we human beings gravitate towards traditional narrative, and according to scholars like Laura Rascaroli, films do everything they can to take advantage of this fact. She writes, the darkness of the auditorium, the comfort of the chair, which induces the spectator to relax and fantasize, the passivity and absence of movement, inviting a psychic and emotive participation. All of this in service of making us nod along and buy into the comfortably predictable narratives on the screen. But what happens when a plot goes in a totally unexpected direction? Or the discourse just completely breaks the mold for storytelling? Welcome to the anti-narrative. According to Robert Scholes, anti-narratives are stories that force us to draw our attention away from the construction of a narrative meaning according to our habitual interpretive processes. In doing so, anti-narratives not only force us to critically reflect on the rules of traditional storytelling, but they also remind us that stories themselves are simply told as codes rather than aspects of human nature or the world. In other words, anti-narratives tend to break us out of our cinema-induced stupor, instead forcing us to think about how the story is being told and how our brains are understanding it. Consider one of the most drastic anti-narrative films in recent memory, Memento, which, by virtue of being told backwards, forces your brain to engage with it in a very different way. Now, Castlevania has no Memento, but it employs a good deal of anti-narrative. While we already touched on how Season 1 defies expectations by choosing to forego the whole "let's kill Dracula" plot, multiple plot lines through multiple seasons similarly defy our expectations. Consider Season 2, for example, where our team actually sets out to kill the King of Night and where we first glimpse the political machinations of Dracula's court. But instead of being your traditional proactive antagonist, Dracula does a whole lot of, well, nothing. In fact, he does so little to advance the war against humanity that his subordinates are actively pissed off at his apathy.
There's no plan. Dracula doesn't act on our recommendations. He barely listens to you and Hector. We're just thrashing around the country randomly.
But even more telling, when Trevor and company finally storm the castle and take on our villain, it's not the epic climax we were expecting. Sure, it has a hell of a build-up with amazing set pieces. However, the battle doesn't end with a climactic bang, but rather with a whimper. Dracula comes to his senses and realizes that he's killing his own child.
Lisa, I'm killing our boy. We painted this room. We made these toys. It's our boy, Lisa. Your greatest gift to me. And I'm killing him.
And this leaves Alucard with no other choice but to slowly walk up to dear old dad and drive a stake through his heart. It's quiet, it's subdued, and it totally subverts our expectations for the storyline, unless of course you played Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
There was a small battle.
It must have been a legendary battle.
Mostly just desperate and sad.
Of course, this is far from the only example of how Castlevania seems to eschew our traditional understanding of narrative. In Season 3, we're introduced to the Judge, a harsh but seemingly fair town magistrate who we grow to begrudgingly love. But after he nobly sacrifices himself in a battle against some religious nutjobs, he relays a dirty secret to our heroes.
Burn my house down.
Yep, the hero that we've grown to love and root for turned out to be a prolific child killer. It's so over the top and dark, it's almost as if the show is thumbing its nose at us.
He was the judge, and he found his little pleasures.
Like any good anti-narrative, it's forcing us to re-examine how easily we buy into traditional hero stories. But Castlevania's penchant for anti-narrative doesn't just force us to take a good hard look at what narratives we buy into. It also questions the very idea of narrative storytelling to begin with. While movies and TV tend to resolve problems in a satisfying way, real life obviously doesn't play by the same rules. Or, as our favorite depressed horse put it,
closure is a made-up thing by Steven Spielberg to sell movie tickets.
And Castlevania seems to acknowledge this as well. Consider the 4th season, in which we follow Count Saint Germain's convoluted plan to bring the love of his life back from the Infinite Corridor.
You're claiming that the final victory of the alchemical process is using Erebus to control the Infinite Corridor.
But strangely, we never get any backstory. Why is this woman continually running from him? What are her true feelings for him in the first place? While we might expect to get answers to these questions in a traditional narrative, Castlevania never gives them. Even on Saint Germain's death, all we're given is the cryptic image of his loved one watching him from the Infinite Corridor. The show offers zero closure. But the plot isn't the only place where Castlevania bucks narrative convention. It also makes some sizable departures in its discourse, or the way the story is told. The most notable one is how the show handles dialogue. If you listen to any of the Hollywood screenwriting gurus, you'll learn that dialogue should be kept lean. In the words of Robert McKee, do not drown your script with endless dialogue and long speeches. Castlevania, of course, does not stick to this maxim at all. In fact, characters are downright loquacious. Conversations about inappropriate relations with farm animals can stretch on for minutes.
That was indeed the most suave tale about sexual congress with livestock that I've ever heard in these parts.
And sometimes characters just talk for the sake of talking.
I once observed to Cypher Belnades that God had quite gone out of fashion. God is now standing right in front of you, and soon, very, very soon, he's going to have sex again.
The end result is that we often spend large chunks of time searching for a narrative thread in a conversation that is simply that, people talking. It's not about moving the plot forward so much as showing us a grounded, nuanced depiction of realistic characters. Now, I know what some of you might be saying. Chris, for all this talk of anti-narrative, doesn't Castlevania employ some fairly standard narratives throughout? And the answer is yes, of course it does. The series finale, for example, does ultimately give a lot of narrative closure. Trevor ends up surviving his literal fight with death, Sypha is pregnant.
You know what scared me the most?
What?
That you might end up calling the kid Trefor, after all.
And Alucard has finally found a person who doesn't want to impale him.
I knew you'd be strange, but I didn't think it would be something like this that brought you back to life.
It's always something like this.
Pretty much as close to a happily ever after ending as you can get. That being said, it would be nearly impossible to create a TV series that flips the bird to narrative altogether. If we did that, it would never get past the suits at the studios. But perhaps more importantly, this selective use of anti-narrative seems to complement Castlevania's video game roots. There's something about a conversation that drones on for way longer than a normal scene that evokes the endless dialogue chains you'd have with an NPC. And there's something about the lack of closure to Saint Germain's story that makes you think, if you only could have played the TV show like the game, you could have unpacked more of that story. That if you had the chance as a player to interact with these characters, you'd dive even deeper into their already considerably deep psychology. But maybe that's the brilliance of Castlevania's use of anti-narrative. It stops the show from being a carbon copy of the source material, and in the process it becomes a much more interesting adaptation. But what do you guys think? Does the series' strength lie in its willingness to embrace the anti-narrative, or are we just excited to finally get a quality video game adaptation? Let us know in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support. Hit that subscribe button like you're slowly putting a stake through your vampire dad's heart, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.